Iran-backed armed groups used to cut a land route across the Middle East all the way down to Gaza, making it easier to transport weapons and personnel. This alliance is informally known as the Axis of Resistance. Their main goal, to counter the U.S. and its main regional partner, Israel. It includes Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas and the Islamic Jihad in Palestinian territories. But the Axis is said to be at its weakest in years. Israel's war in Gaza since 2023 has dealt a significant blow, with Hamas losing some of its most senior leadership as well as infrastructure. The Axis took another hit when opposition rebels toppled the Syrian government the following year. The collapse of the Assad regime represented the crumbling of a cornerstone of the Axis of Resistance, which was once the gateway for Iranian weapons into Lebanon. Like Lebanon, Iraq has been dragged into the war by Iran-backed groups launching attacks on U.S. interests in Baghdad. Houthis in Yemen have yet to intervene and launch their own attacks, but have voiced support for Iran and its new supreme leader. We're joined now by Stephen Zunes. He's Professor of Politics and Program Director for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco. Good to see you again, Professor. Let me start, of course, with the Axis. Apparently weakened, but are they down and out for the count?
Well, as long as the United States is attacking Iran, as long as Israel continues its occupation and its attacks and siege in Gaza, there's going to be some forms of resistance. And unfortunately, as we've seen historically, the more that Israel, the United States, end up waging wars in ways that kill more civilians than military, it tends to create terrorists faster than they can kill them. So, by certain measures, the so-called axis of resistance has indeed been weakened. I think we have to keep into account that unless the root causes are addressed, there's going to be new and different kinds of resistance emerging later.
Professor, in the meantime, the Department of Homeland Security has ramped up warnings of possible attacks by Iran and its proxies in the United States. What do we know about Tehran's ability to carry out, terror operations and cyber attacks overseas?
They haven't tended to engage in much in the way of terrorism overseas, outside of the Middle East. And they have occasionally assassinated dissidents in Europe and elsewhere, but random terrorist attacks, that's not really their modus operandi, and they really don't have that kind of capability. I mean, it's possible that you get to see some individual who is enraged by the sight of, once again, the United States killing large numbers of Muslim civilians who might, engage in an individual terror attack. But in terms of anything coordinated, in terms of drone attacks or major act of terrorism, but taking multiple lives that the Iranian government's behind, I think that's pretty unlikely at this point.
Okay, and just looking at the strategic timing and conflict itself, Professor, Mr. Trump says the war is nearing an end, even claiming there's practically nothing left to target, while Iran warns of a longer fight ahead. So given those mixed signals, how long could this conflict realistically last, and what sort of factors might extend or shorten it?
Well, they're mixed. Unfortunately, there were mixed signals coming from Trump himself, saying that he was not stopping anything less than unconditional surrender, then saying we almost won, that we practically destroyed everything, and yet, unfortunately, Iran still seems to be firing missiles and drones and blocking international shipping. The concern is that even if Trump said, "Oh, we've destroyed a lot of their capability," and declare victory, Iran might not be willing to do so, because they figure, hey, maybe the United States and Israel are just going to resupply and reload and then just attack us again. And they want to make sure they're sending a message that we'll keep doing damage. We'll keep destroying much of the Middle East unless and until we have some security guarantees that we won't be attacked again. And yes, this is going to mean the deaths of many thousands more Iranian civilians. But remember, this very regime slaughtered thousands of Iranian civilians themselves just a couple months ago. So they're willing to take this is an existential threat for them. So they may be willing to fight on for the long term.
Professor, the focus right now is on the Strait of Hormuz and oil markets. I'm wondering, based on what you've seen over the past 2 weeks or so, how has oil changed the way the U.S. is carrying out its operations now in Iran in terms of how it fights, where it fights, but also, I guess, the messaging at home as far as gasoline prices are concerned?
Well, for years, Middle East scholars, like myself, have warned if the United States did attack Iran in this manner, they would be able to essentially close the Strait of Hormuz, and it would have a terrible impact on oil prices and all the things that are related to oil. Already, Americans are seeing dramatic rises of the petrol at the pumps. And remember, the United States, more than almost any other country, is very much dependent on individual automobile transport. So, this is hitting Americans particularly hard. And given all the many other uses of oil, from fertilizers to plastics, we can see the other inflationary pressures. And I think that, in addition to, the moral and legal questions that a lot of Americans have about this war, the economic impact is something that's going to become increasingly apparent as it drags on.
Professor, regarding Israel's role in this conflict, do you think Mr. Netanyahu's endgame align with U.S. objectives? And could it be that Israel stands to gain more from this conflict than the U.S.?
The difference that might be emerging is that I think Israel's goal basically is to make Iran a failed state. That is to destroy as much of the civilian infrastructure as possible, encourage Kurds and other national minorities to rebel, and you make it so there's no longer any kind of deterrent factor to what they want to do in the region. So they have, I think, a more maximalist goal. I think there are elements from the Trump administration that want to see this as well, but I think there are also some elements in the Trump administration that are concerned about the long-term economic impact, including the political impact this might have in the fall elections, and other areas. So though there's not a clear-cut differentiation between the United States and Israel at the moment, we could certainly see that emerging in the coming days and weeks.
And looking at the broader Gulf reaction, Professor, so far, Gulf governments have largely limited their role to defense. Under what circumstances might that change?
Well, none of the Arab Gulf states were enthusiastic about the United States going to war. In fact, they warned just of the very consequences we are seeing. So I don't think they want to do anything that might drag the war on further. I think they're still privately pretty upset at the United States for having gone ahead and done this. At the same time, they're quite upset that Iran has gone beyond simply going after U.S. military bases, which they would have the right to do since the U.S. attacked first, but have gone on to hit military and civilian infrastructure in the Gulf states themselves. So they're going to do whatever they can for their defense, and they'll support American efforts to protect themselves. But I don't think they're going to join any kind of offensive military operation.
Understood. Very quickly, the UAE, Professor, seems to have borne the brunt of the attacks, based on the numbers anyway. What is it about the United Arab Emirates that makes it a higher value target to Iran?
It doesn't make sense in many ways. They don't have the major bases like Bahrain and Qatar, but in many ways they represent the opulence and the connections to Western capitalism and the like in a way that the other states don't. And so I think a lot of it might be just a symbolism of attacking, saying, "Hey, nowhere is safe, no matter how wealthy you are, no matter what your international connections are. We're coming after you."
All right. Thank you very much, Professor, for your insight this morning. We were speaking to Stephen Zunes, Professor of Politics and Program Director for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco.